I think it's important to workers to hold in mind that not talking about sexual abuse can be a really sensible, self-protective thing for men to do. When you think about all the negative messages and all the unhelpful ideas that men might face if they disclosed that they were sexually abused, it makes a lot of sense that they'd be extremely cautious about who they would talk to about that.
So there's a couple of issues with this. We would say, as a general principle, it's great to have the message out there. And the more men who speak on their own behalf, the more this information is normalised, as we talked about before. But I would say to any individual man, take a lot of care with who you choose to talk to. There's an enormous psychological benefit in sharing with a sympathetic and compassionate audience. There's a real de-benefit in sharing with someone who's going to run in horror or judge you or cast you out of the family or whatever the response might be. So I think the man needs to really be aware of what the responses might be, to have worked through all of the different ways that the person might respond and what that then would mean to them. So they're not going into it unwarned and unprepared, as it were. I'd also probably try and work with the man to find out why it is that he wants to do it. Sometimes, there are good reasons for sharing. Sometimes there's a kind of fantasy of reconciliation or this will kind of change my relationship to my family or something. If we think that's unrealistic or if we're not sure about it, we'll try and work on that idea with the man, talk all that stuff through first so that if there is anything that's likely not to work out so well for him, he's at least prepared for it ahead of time. And maybe it'll turn out that what he's really trying to do is deal with something else that can actually be dealt with more effectively in the in therapy.
I would be looking to ask the question, why now? And why not, a month ago? What would you hope would be the result? I would also probably want to ask him about what if that wasn't the result. In fact, there were other outcomes. How would he feel about that? How would he manage that? And what might the outcome be for the other person in telling that story? So looking at it from different perspectives, I think is an important thing. Perhaps helping him consider how much of the story he wants to tell, what would be useful in telling the whole story, or perhaps in having a conversation with the other person, in being invitational, in saying to the other person, how would it be if I was to explain, something that happened to me to you. So treading carefully, taking it slowly, and not having expectations that somehow the telling of the story was going to change things necessarily. Sometimes it does, but not necessarily.
If a man is saying to me in a session, look, I would really like to tell someone about my sexual abuse, I would have a conversation about a number of things. Firstly, what's their motivation? What's driving them to want to disclose their experiences of sexual abuse? So I would want to explore that with them. I would explore with them what are the expectations of what might actually happen if they disclose. So it might be to a partner, or it might be to a family member, it might be to a friend, or it might be to someone in authority. What are their expectations of that person or people's responses? And doing a bit of reality testing around those expectations. So exploring that first. I would ensure they've also got a good support system in place in case it doesn't go quite the way they would like it to go. We might do some rehearsal in a therapy process to assist them to think it through and the words that they might use, and to have a number of different ways or strategies of approaching it, because they might disclose more indirectly and the person might not get it, might not hear it. So how might they, what's their second or third or fourth option in terms of engaging in that disclosure?
So we kind of run through some possible scenarios, because everyone goes into this sort of space with an expectation, I suppose, of what they would like to have happen. So what's their ideal outcome? Have they thought about the ways in which they might say it, the context in which they might say it? And we workshop it really. So, and what if, and the what if. So what if this person was, if the response wasn't your ideal response? What if they responded in a way which was blaming of you, or was, are you ready for this? So are you ready for all of the kind of scenarios that we can think through? So if they've got support and they feel ready and they kind of have an expectation that it could go north or it could go south, and they're ready for those eventualities, and they've got a plan B, they've got a backup plan to debrief with somebody afterwards, then I think they go into it with a much better resourced kind of frame of mind. Yeah.
Why? That would be the first thing. So what will happen next if you tell someone? What will happen next? And the whole point of that question is to find out what they're thinking will happen next, and then have a conversation about all the other things that might happen next. So that they're making a well-informed decision, rather than a decision that may be based in, if I tell someone, that'll fix it. Or if I tell someone, they'll understand everything about me. Or I'll feel better. Or some of those things may happen, but none of them may happen, and something worse might happen, because not everyone responds really well when you disclose that something awful was done to you. So helping clients engage all the possibilities so that they're making an informed decision about who or when, and also the idea, a lot of survivors have an all or nothing framework. So the idea is, I'll tell everything or nothing. And having a conversation about, actually there's a whole range of levels that we can put in there about, you can tell someone that you're assaulted without telling them that it was a sexual assault. And people will get all the issues of being assaulted, but you don't have to engage the sexual side of it. So you can kind of experiment with disclosing in a safer, so there's gradated ways. Having all that kind of conversation with someone and setting it up so that at the point, if you have all that conversation, they decide they're still going to disclose, or that it will get them where they want to go, or they're ready to cope even if it doesn't, then making sure that you can arrange that so they've got supports when they do disclose, just in case it goes really badly.
And sometimes, I've spoken with people who believe they've already told, and it doesn't make sense to them, they haven't had a conversation, or they believe people should have been able to join the dots and picked it up, in a sense. So almost start from a position that the other person hasn't been aware, and they now need to tell them in a very direct way because they're not getting the message, which is quite a challenge. But I think also, as you say, it's about how do you start to provide information, being clear about what it is you're saying, how you speak to that person in this. So there's understanding that sometimes people will be asking questions about wanting more information, and then you don't necessarily need to tell them all the details of that. It may not be useful for them to do it, but you may ask that question, believing that knowing more will make it easier for them or help them to understand, when that may or not be the case. And so I think it's been really careful about how you speak about that and what information you provide, because graphic physical details rarely produce a positive outcome for anybody in getting into all that sort of information. When you're disclosing about this, it more has a shock value, and it probably speaks to the extent of distress of what's happened, but at the same time it makes it very difficult for people sometimes to respond appropriately around this.
And I can think of clients that have been down that road, and one of the things that I've learnt from that is go slowly, be mindful of what your motivations are, and what would be good about disclosing and what would be the challenges of that for you. So helping men build anticipation skills around what might happen when they disclose, building supports for them to have in place if they do disclose. Like I'm thinking of a client who told their family who knew nothing about his child sexual abuse, and it was quite possible that his parents were going to dismiss it. So we talked about how would you handle that if your mum dismissed what happened or didn't believe it or collapsed, you know. And so we did a lot of anticipating how would you deal with that happened and what support do you want to have. So this guy also brought his partner with him to do that. You know, I think the saying is it's only disclose when you have the skills and the resources to cope with the worst scenario that could happen when you disclose. So that if you don't have the skills and resources to manage what might happen if someone doesn't believe you and that's too triggering for you, then it's, to me, the first step is to build those skills to manage what might happen if you're triggered, if you're not believed. And having choices about how much to disclose. So, you know, disclosure doesn't mean you tell everything that happened. You might just say one aspect of what happened and test the waters and see how that lands. So kind of grading the disclosure, I think, can be helpful too. And the other thing that we did was, with this client, he told his parents that he wants to have a really important conversation about his history, and he prepared them, created a good context for the disclosure to happen in. They were settled, they knew that they were going to have an important conversation. So the ground was a little bit more prepared. So those things can help.
I probably want to explore with a person who was thinking of disclosing what their expectations and I guess what their purpose in disclosing was, and the degree to which the extent to which it's likely those expectations would be met, and what it'll be like for them if they're not met, who they want to disclose to. And I guess the fact that once they disclose to that person, they don't have a lot of control over what that person does with that information. So, although they may disclose to me, it's within some clear boundaries and contracting around confidentiality. If a person in your private life says they're not going to tell anyone, that's only worth the words that are given. There's nothing binding around that. So I think that's something I'd explore as well. If it's in the context of a close relationship, then I'd probably talk about some of the larger parts of the relationship too. You know, how much trust is there in this relationship in general, now that you're going to put this other significant issue in that you're asking this person to trust? Has this person demonstrated that they can hold trust around other parts of the relationship? And if not, what are the implications and what are the risks of disclosing?
I think it's really important that it's something he wants to do. He doesn't feel pressured to do or thinks he should do, because it would be the right thing to do that would ensure his healing recovery. It may be that perhaps it's not necessary, but if he does choose to do that, that he would ensure and he would plan what supports he can put in place that will help him to do that. And I would focus on self-care. In most of my work with men, I focus on self-care. It can be quite difficult for anyone actually to understand the concept of self-care. It's often a quite abstract notion to people. So I would continue to talk about that, and I'd share other people's experience of how they could care for themselves. Because if people are going to disclose something as big and as significant as that, they would need to know how to care for themselves. So yeah, having a plan, I think having a plan is really good. And that they, can consult again, come back to counselling to evaluate whether, I thought I'd try this, but then thought I didn't. I'm not quite ready yet, but need to just explore supports further.
I might also invite men to think about, is there anything they'd like to say to those people about what they need from them in telling them that information. And I think I often find it's a common theme that often the men's partners or family or friends have a sense of really wanting to be there for the man, but having a feeling like they don't know what they could do, or they don't know what the right thing to say is, or having a fear of saying the wrong thing. So sometimes it's perhaps an unfortunate reality that the man might have to also educate, his partner or his family or his friends about what it is he needs.
This is one of the kind of cruel things of sexual abuse, is that often people won't know how to respond, and obviously we want people to have a supported experience of when somebody tells somebody, but the person may themselves not know how to respond and what might be responsible, what might be a useful response for that person. So sometimes it's about the man kind of working out what it is he would like, and even foregrounding that to the person. I'm going to tell you something that's really important. I don't need you to do anything for me. I don't need you to look after me or anything like that. But this is something I want you to be aware of. And so in a sense, if you're doing it from that position of strength, that's really important. That's a valuable place to have that conversation from. If you're doing it and you're looking for something from another person, then there's more risk or potential distress that might be caused to you by that, because you just don't know how that person might respond, and it might not be anything about not wanting to care for you. It's just this information might come as such a shock, or they might feel quite overwhelmed or quite unable to respond to that. If we think of responses to trauma as fight, flight and freeze, those people might have the same response. They might completely freeze. They might feel quite distressed and want to kind of move away themselves. They might kind of want to almost get into a kind of discussion about this process, trying to understand about it. And so I think that's really important to understand about what you're looking for in doing that, but also what you're looking for from that person in doing that, and how you might support them into providing an appropriate response. That doesn't mean you need to take care of them, but it might be that part of the process I'm aware of with some guys is that they understand how challenging this information might be, and so they do want the person to feel supported by them in telling this person, particularly when it's a partner, a family member. In our service, and I personally we've kind of invited family members into counselling, and there's been a number of times I've had the privilege of being present when that's been told to partners or family members, and that's quite an emotionally charged space for anybody who does this work, and because it's like you really just don't know how people are going to respond. And so it's really important that you take some time and are really careful about that.